The Galactic Department of Planetary Classifications had made exactly one mistake in its 17,000-year history. That mistake was filing Earth under Class 15, harmless wildlife, negligible threat level, suitable for student field trips. Nobody lived long enough to correct the paperwork. Zephyrus Blandsworth III sat in his beige cubicle on level 4847 of the department's main tower, methodically rubber-stamping classification forms with the enthusiasm of a depressed sloth experiencing existential dread. His job was magnificently simple. Look at planetary survey data, assign threat level based on a 47-page manual that nobody had updated since the galactic dark ages, move on to the next form. He'd classified 847,293 worlds in his illustrious career, ranging from mildly concerning mushroom planets to rocks that sometimes move when nobody's looking, and exactly none of them had ever surprised him in ways that didn't involve paperwork errors. The department itself was a monument to bureaucratic efficiency, which is to say it was neither efficient nor particularly good at bureaucracy, but it was definitely monumental. 17,000 floors of filing cabinets, classification specialists, and coffee machines that had achieved consciousness sometime around the third millennium, but were too polite to mention it. The building's architectural style could best be described as aggressively beige with hints of despair. Earth's file landed on Zephyrus's desk on a Tuesday that felt exactly like every other Tuesday since the heat death of his enthusiasm. The preliminary survey drones had filed their standard report. Bipedal mammals, primitive technology, spend most of time looking at small rectangular devices, appear docile. Primary activities include walking in circles for no apparent reason, consuming heated plant extracts, and making loud noises at sporting events. Threat assessment: negligible. Dominant species appears easily distracted by moving pictures and small animals. The accompanying holographic photos showed creatures sitting peacefully in parks, feeding small flying animals that looked suspiciously like they could be weaponized but probably weren't, and engaging in what appeared to be recreational walking while staring at their rectangular devices with the focused intensity of monks contemplating the universe. Obviously harmless, Zephyrus muttered, applying his rubber stamp with the precise force of someone who had given up on life but not on proper stamp technique. Primitive technology, obsessed with small screens, feed random birds. Class 15, next! What Zephyrus didn't know, couldn't have known, and wouldn't have believed if someone had told him, was that he had just made the most spectacularly wrong classification in galactic history. But in fairness to Zephyrus, the survey drones had only observed a small park in downtown Portland on a particularly quiet Thursday, and even the most advanced xenosociological analysis couldn't have predicted that humans consider Quiet Thursday in Portland to be representative of absolutely nothing about their species. The first research expedition arrived 3 months later, during what Earth's meteorologists optimistically called early spring, but which was actually just winter pretending to be reasonable. Dr. Quiblina Measurement, senior xenobiologist and holder of 14 advanced degrees in being very smart about things that don't usually try to kill you, stepped off the transport ship bureaucratic necessity with the confidence of someone who had studied 1,247 different species across 17 star systems and found them all disappointingly predictable. Her impressive academic credentials included a doctorate in xenobiology, a master's degree in interspecies communication, and a certificate in basic first aid that she'd never actually needed because Class 15 species were, by definition, about as dangerous as particularly aggressive lettuce. Her team of 6 researchers followed behind, equipped with the finest scanning equipment that galactic bureaucracy could purchase at the lowest possible price from the lowest bidder, which meant it was technically functional but had a disturbing tendency to translate anything more complex than hello, as your mother was a hamster and your father smelt of elderberries, regardless of whether the species in question had mothers, hamsters, or any concept of elderberries. Remember, Dr. Measurement announced, adjusting her official research hat, a ridiculous piece of headgear that served no practical purpose but was mandatory according to Department Regulation 847B. We're dealing with Class 15 organisms. Standard behavioral assessment indicates they probably spend their days eating vegetation, making simple tools, and possibly engaging in primitive social rituals involving the exchange of small, shiny objects. Standard observation protocol applies. Maintain a safe distance of at least 50 meters, document all behavior through approved recording devices, and do not, under any circumstances, make direct contact with what we believe to be the dominant species until we've completed our preliminary assessment. What Dr. Measurement didn't know, and what the survey drones had failed to mention in their typically brief reports, was that their carefully selected landing site was a small family farm in rural Nebraska, owned and operated by Jeremiah Buckleberry, a 73-year-old retired aerospace engineer who had spent 40 years designing propulsion systems for spacecraft, 20 years teaching physics at the state university, and the last 3 years growing corn and fixing tractors for the sheer joy of working with his hands instead of his brain. Jeremiah was, in the parlance of his neighbors, one of those engineer types who could probably build a rocket out of farm equipment if he put his mind to it, which wasn't actually far from the truth, though Jeremiah had never mentioned to anyone that he'd actually designed 3 of the propulsion systems currently being used in Earth's modest space program. He preferred to let people think he was just an old farmer who happened to be unusually good at fixing complicated machinery. The aliens spent their first day observing what they were absolutely, completely, 100% certain was the planet's most advanced civilization, a small herd of Holstein cattle who had achieved what appeared to be perfect agricultural dominance over their environment. Fascinating, Dr. Measurement whispered into her official recording device, a piece of equipment that looked like a metallic banana and had roughly the same level of artificial intelligence. The large black and white creatures appear to have achieved complete agricultural supremacy over this region. Notice how they've trained the smaller bipedal servants to bring them food and water on a precise schedule. Her assistant, Dr. Flibbert Nonsensical, whose name was unfortunately accurate, nodded sagely while consulting his xenobiological assessment charts. And observe how the bipedal creatures clean up after them without any apparent coercion. Clearly, a sophisticated servant-master relationship has evolved here. The large creatures must possess some form of psychic control or extremely advanced behavioral conditioning techniques. Dr. Measurement made careful notes. Subject species demonstrates remarkable intelligence in domestication of bipedal servants. Servants appear willing, even eager, to provide sustenance and maintenance services. Possible evidence of telepathic control or advanced chemical manipulation of servant brain chemistry. Recommend upgraded threat assessment. Meanwhile, Jeremiah was standing at his kitchen window, drinking his morning coffee and wondering why his cows were acting so peculiar. They kept looking toward the woods and mooing at seemingly empty air, which was unusual because his cows were generally practical creatures who didn't waste energy on pointless mooing. Being a man who had spent his entire career solving problems through careful observation and logical analysis, he figured it was probably nothing that couldn't be solved with a good cup of coffee and the time-tested strategy of ignoring weird things until they either went away or became obviously important enough to worry about. This approach had served him well through 40 years of engineering challenges, 20 years of university politics, and 3 years of farming, and he saw no reason to abandon it now just because his cows were having an off day. On day 2 of their observation mission, the research team made what they proudly recorded as first official contact with the dominant species of Terra, which would go down in galactic history as the most diplomatically disastrous first contact event since the infamous Great Misunderstanding of Kepler 442b, where a peaceful trade negotiation had accidentally started a three-way war because someone had mispronounced the word greetings in a way that roughly translated to "your reproductive organs are aesthetically displeasing." Following standard galactic protocol for approaching dominant species, as outlined in the 847-page manual So You Want to Talk to Aliens, a bureaucrat's guide to not starting interstellar wars, Dr. Measurement approached the largest cow with her universal translator activated and began the traditional diplomatic greeting that had been successfully used to establish peaceful contact with over 3,000 different species across the galaxy. "Greetings, wise beings," she announced in her most formal diplomatic voice, the one she'd practiced in front of a mirror for 6 months before her first field assignment. "We come in peace from the stars above, seeking knowledge, friendship, and mutually beneficial cultural exchange between our peoples." Bessie, a 5-year-old Holstein with absolutely no idea what was happening but a generally philosophical attitude toward life's inexplicable moments, responded by doing what cows do best when confronted with strange situations. She looked up from her grass, considered the small alien creature making noise at her, and mooed. It was not a particularly meaningful moo. It was more of a, well, that's different moo, the kind of moo that roughly translates to, "I acknowledge that something unusual is happening, but I'm not sufficiently concerned to stop eating." If cows had shoulders, Bessie would have shrugged. The universal translator, a device that had successfully decoded the languages of thousands of species, ranging from crystalline entities that communicated through controlled radiation to gaseous beings that spoke in chemical formulas, processed this input with its full computational power and confidently announced, "Translation complete. Message received. Your arrival brings great joy to our pastoral empire. We have been expecting visitors from beyond the Sky Dome, and we welcome you with the traditional blessing of our ancestors." Dr. Measurement nearly fainted with excitement. The implications were staggering. "They knew we were coming," she gasped, frantically making notes. "This species must have psychic abilities, or perhaps they have some form of long-range detection technology that we haven't identified yet. This is unprecedented for a Class 15 species." Doctor Nonsensical, meanwhile, was running every scan he could think of. "The bio-readings are incredible. These creatures appear to have achieved perfect metabolic efficiency. Look at this data. They can convert simple vegetation into complex proteins with almost no energy waste. And their social structure. It's amazing! They've created a society where the servants actively compete to provide better service." What followed was the most diplomatically disastrous first contact in galactic history, though it would take several years for anyone to realize just how disastrous it actually was. The aliens spent the next 6 hours attempting to negotiate formal trade agreements with various farm animals, each conversation becoming more absurd than the last. According to their universal translator, the chickens were apparently very interested in establishing a grain-based interstellar economy, and had strong opinions about the political implications of free-range philosophy. The pigs were supposedly deeply concerned about interstellar agricultural policy and wanted to discuss the ethical ramifications of cross-species dietary exchanges. Most impressively, the barn cat, Whiskers, was supposedly the chief military advisor to the pastoral empire, who kept mentioning something about territorial expansion and the strategic importance of elevated observation posts, which was actually just him complaining about the dog being in his favorite sunny spot and expressing his desire to claim the top of the hay bales as his exclusive domain. Dr. Measurement was practically vibrating with scientific excitement. This is incredible. We're witnessing a complex multi-species confederation with specialized roles and sophisticated political structures. The feline appears to be the strategic planning specialist, while the larger ungulates handle resource management and the smaller avians focus on economic policy. She was so busy taking notes that she almost missed the moment when everything went spectacularly wrong. Jeremiah, who had been watching this entire bizarre spectacle from his kitchen window while working his way through his second cup of coffee, finally decided he'd seen enough weirdness for one morning. The strange folks in the metallic outfits had been bothering his animals for hours, and while Jeremiah was generally a live and let live sort of person, he figured hospitality demanded that he at least check if they needed help or directions or possibly medical attention. Being a neighborly sort who had been raised to believe that visitors should be offered refreshments regardless of how oddly they were dressed or how strangely they were behaving, he walked outside with a tray containing a pitcher of fresh lemonade, a plate of his wife's homemade chocolate chip cookies, and several glasses, just in case the visitors were thirsty. "Y'all look like you could use some refreshments," he called out cheerfully, using the same friendly tone he'd used to greet any visitors to his farm. "Been out here for hours in this heat. Figured you might be getting parched." The aliens panicked. This was not in the manual. Nowhere in the 847-page "So You Want to Talk to Aliens" guide was there a protocol for what to do when one of the servant species approached the diplomatic team directly. Docile. Measurement had read extensively about this scenario in her xenobiology textbooks. Sometimes the servant classes of highly advanced civilizations would attempt to communicate with visitors, usually to warn them about violating sacred diplomatic protocols or to deliver messages from their masters. "Quick!" she hissed to her team, frantically consulting her emergency procedures manual. "He must be trying to tell us we're breaking some kind of sacred law." The universal translator indicated that the cattle empire has highly ritualized social interactions. We might have committed some horrible breach of etiquette. Dr. Nonsensical was frantically flipping through his cultural analysis guidebook, looking for the appropriate response. Chapter 847, subsection 15.3. When approached by servant species during diplomatic contact, researchers should show respect for their masters by immediately withdrawing to a safe distance and running away very fast while making apologetic gestures toward the dominant species. And that's exactly what they did. 6 highly trained xenobiologists, equipped with the finest scientific equipment the galaxy could provide, turned and ran toward their spaceship like their pants were on fire, occasionally stopping to bow apologetically toward the cows and shouting what they hoped were respectful phrases like, "We meant no disrespect to your magnificent empire," and "Please forgive our ignorance of your customs." Jeremiah stood there holding his tray of lemonade and cookies, watching 6 aliens sprint across his pasture while genuflecting to his livestock, and came to the reasonable conclusion that this was definitely the strangest thing that had ever happened on his farm, and possibly the strangest thing that had ever happened in Nebraska, which was saying something because Nebraska had seen some pretty weird stuff over the years. "Well," he said to Bessie, who was watching the proceedings with the patient tolerance of a cow who had seen humans do inexplicable things before, "that was the damnedest thing I ever did see." Bessie mooed thoughtfully, which the abandoned universal translator lying in the grass helpfully translated as, "Indeed, the diplomatic implications are staggering, and I believe we may have witnessed a significant breakdown in interspecies communication protocols." The research team's report, filed from the safety of orbit approximately 6 hours later, caused quite a stir back at galactic headquarters. Dr. Measurement had worked through the night, cross-referencing her observations with every xenobiological database in the galactic network, and her conclusions were both detailed and completely wrong. "Urgent report. Earth classification requires immediate review," she announced to the Emergency Council session that had been hastily convened at 3 a.m. Galactic Standard Time. The cattle empire has not only trained servants, but these servants appear to have some form of autonomous initiative. They approached our diplomatic team independently, possibly to deliver warnings or messages from their masters. She displayed her holographic recordings of the encounter. Notice how the bipedal servant approaches with what appears to be ritual offerings, possibly food items or ceremonial objects. The fact that he initiated contact suggests either sophisticated behavioral programming by the dominant species or the development of limited autonomous intelligence in the servant class. Director Pompington Stuffybottom, head of the Department of First Contact Situations and proud owner of the galaxy's most impressively bureaucratic job title, stroked his ceremonial chin tentacles thoughtfully while reviewing the data. Stuffybottom had been in charge of first contact protocols for over 2 centuries, and he'd seen some strange things in his time, but this was definitely unusual. "This is deeply concerning," he announced, using his official "something has gone terribly wrong, but we're going to handle it professionally" voice. Class 15 species aren't supposed to have servants of any kind, autonomous or otherwise. They're barely supposed to have agriculture, let alone complex social hierarchies with specialized roles and trained subordinate species. "Do, sir," interrupted junior analyst Bibble Worrywart, whose job was to worry about things so other people didn't have to. "Perhaps we should consider the possibility that our initial classification was slightly inaccurate." The suggestion hung in the air like a particularly uncomfortable silence. In the 17,000-year history of the Galactic Department of Planetary Classifications, questioning a classification was like questioning the fundamental laws of physics. It simply wasn't done. "Slightly inaccurate," Director Stuffybottom repeated, his voice rising to levels that made his subordinates nervous. "Bibble, we don't do slightly inaccurate. We do completely correct or catastrophically wrong. There is no middle ground in planetary classification." "Yes, sir, but sir, perhaps we should send a proper diplomatic mission with, actual diplomats who have training in complex interspecies negotiations." Director Stuffybottom considered this suggestion for exactly 4.7 seconds before making the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. "Excellent idea. Alert the Department of Diplomatic Relations, send our finest negotiator, and make sure they understand that they're dealing with a sophisticated civilization that may have been significantly underestimated." 3 weeks later, Ambassador Prestigious Handshaker arrived on Earth aboard the diplomatic vessel Peaceful Intentions, accompanied by a full diplomatic retinue, ceremonial gifts representing the finest artistic achievements of 17 different civilizations, and a detailed 40-page plan for establishing formal relations with what the Galactic Diplomatic Corps now believed was the Bovine Confederation of Terror. Vril, Ambassador Handshaker was the galaxy's most experienced diplomat, a being who had successfully negotiated peace treaties with species that communicated through controlled explosions, trade agreements with entities that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, and cultural exchange programs with civilizations that considered time to be a form of artistic expression. If anyone could handle first contact with a sophisticated agricultural empire, it was Prestigious Handshaker. Unfortunately, there was one small problem with this plan. Jeremiah had sold his cattle the week before. The reason for this sale was purely practical and had nothing to do with aliens, diplomacy, or interstellar politics. Jeremiah's arthritis had been acting up. His insurance company had been pestering him about updating his farm liability coverage, and the local cattle market was offering very good prices for quality Holstein stock. Being a practical man who knew an opportunity when he saw one, he'd sold his herd to a young farming family from the next county over who were just starting out and needed good breeding stock. The new owner of the farm was Lurleen Crankshaw, a 68-year-old retired librarian who had inherited the property from her great-aunt and decided that retirement was boring and farming might be interesting. Laline raised chickens, grew organic vegetables, collected antique farm equipment, and had absolutely no patience for nonsense of any kind, having spent 40 years dealing with people who couldn't figure out how to use a card catalogue. When she spotted a group of what appeared to be city folks in weird costumes lurking around her property at dawn on a Tuesday morning, she did what any sensible person would do. She assumed they were either lost tourists, performance artists, or people who had escaped from somewhere and needed professional help. More importantly, she called the sheriff, because trespassing was trespassing regardless of how unusual the trespasser's clothing choices might be. Sheriff Bubba Turkleton arrived just as Ambassador Handshaker was attempting to present a ceremonial crystal of eternal friendship to Henrietta, Lurline's prize-winning Rhode Island red hen, while delivering a formal diplomatic speech that he had been practicing for 3 weeks. "Greetings, noble leaders of the Bovine Confederation," Ambassador Handshaker announced, holding the crystal high while his diplomatic staff arranged themselves in the traditional formation for important ceremonial occasions. "We come before you as representatives of the Galactic Council, seeking to establish formal diplomatic relations between our peoples. We offer this crystal of eternal friendship as a symbol of our desire for peaceful cooperation and mutual understanding." Henrietta, who was a very intelligent chicken, but not so intelligent that she understood interstellar diplomacy, pecked at the crystal curiously, decided it wasn't food, and wandered off to look for bugs. "Ma'am," Sheriff Turkleton said politely to Laline, tipping his hat in the way that small-town sheriffs had been doing for generations. "We got a call about trespassers, something about folks in costumes bothering your chickens." The aliens interpreted this as the arrival of the military. In Ambassador Handshaker's experience, when the local authorities arrived during diplomatic negotiations, it usually meant either that you had committed some terrible breach of protocol, or that the situation was about to become very dangerous very quickly. The fact that the military representative was armed, Sheriff Turkleton carried a standard-issue sidearm, as was normal for law enforcement, and appeared to be questioning the local inhabitants, suggested that the diplomatic situation was deteriorating rapidly. "The servant class has summoned their warriors," Ambassador Handshaker screamed into his emergency communicator, abandoning all pretense of diplomatic protocol. "Repeat, the chickens have military support. The situation is escalating beyond diplomatic parameters." What followed was a comedy of errors that would be remembered throughout the galaxy as the Great Poultry Panic of Stardate 7849.2, and would become required reading at diplomatic academies as an example of how spectacularly wrong first contact situations could go. The aliens, convinced they were witnessing the Chicken Empire's military response to their diplomatic overture, began what they thought was an appropriate defensive retreat. This involved a great deal of running, shouting, and accidentally activating their ship's emergency beacon, which sent out an automated distress signal that roughly translated to, "Mayday, Mayday, diplomatic mission under attack by militarized farm birds. Request immediate evacuation." Sheriff Turkleton, meanwhile, was trying to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate prank, a piece of performance art that had gotten out of hand, or if these folks had escaped from a mental health facility and needed medical attention. In his 23 years of law enforcement, he'd seen some unusual things, but nothing quite like watching a group of people in metallic costumes run around his neighbor's chicken coop while screaming about military chickens. "Now hold on there!" he called out, following the aliens toward their spaceship with the patient tone of a man who had dealt with everything from drunk college students to escaped livestock. "Y'all don't need to run. I just want to talk. Nobody's in trouble here." The universal translator, still functioning despite the chaos, helpfully interpreted this as, "Surrender now or face the wrath of our poultry overlords. Resistance is futile. The chickens demand unconditional submission." Ambassador Handshaker, drawing on his extensive diplomatic training and 2 centuries of experience in crisis management, made the command decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. He activated the emergency evacuation protocol, a procedure that was supposed to be used only in cases of immediate life-threatening danger or imminent planetary destruction. Within minutes, the entire diplomatic mission was racing toward orbit, broadcasting a galaxy-wide alert that sent shockwaves through every government, military organization, and academic institution within 50 light-years. Earth, species more dangerous than previously assessed. They have weaponized their food sources and trained military servants. Class 15, designation clearly incorrect. Recommend immediate threat reassessment. The message reached the Galactic Department of Planetary Classifications at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday, which was unfortunately during Director Stuffy Bottom's extended lunch break, which may have involved a slight detour to his favorite restaurant on Alpha Centauri and possibly a quick visit to the casino on Rigel 7. The emergency was handled by Acting Deputy Assistant Director Flustered McBumbleton, a nervous individual who had been on the job for exactly 4 days and whose previous experience was limited to filing reports about planets where the most dangerous thing was mildly aggressive moss or occasionally carnivorous flowers. McBumbleton read the alert 3 times, consulted the emergency procedures manual twice, called his supervisor, who was also at lunch, and made the decision that would inadvertently turn Earth into the most feared planet in known space. He upgraded Earth's classification to Class 3, potentially hazardous, military capabilities unknown, approach with extreme caution. He also, in his nervousness and general inexperience with galactic communication systems, accidentally sent the alert to the entire galactic communication network instead of just the Department of Planetary Classifications. Within minutes, the message was being broadcast on every major news network, military communication channel, and academic research forum in the galaxy. Within 6 hours, every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy knew that Earth was apparently much more dangerous than previously thought, and the implications were staggering. The tentacled confederation of slimy worlds immediately rerouted all shipping lanes to avoid the Sol system, adding an extra 12 days to their standard commercial routes. The crystal beings of pure logic ran their defense calculations through their most advanced supercomputers, and concluded that any species capable of weaponizing food sources was clearly operating on a level of strategic thinking that their logical minds couldn't comprehend. The hive mind of Buzzington, a collective consciousness of 17 billion insectoid beings, collectively decided that Earth was probably best left alone until we understand their military doctrine better. Most concerning of all, the Galactic Insurance Consortium immediately updated their risk assessment charts, classifying the Sol system as an extreme risk zone, with insurance premiums so astronomically high that it was literally cheaper to fly around the entire galaxy than to risk passing through Earth's solar system. Meanwhile, on Earth, absolutely nothing had changed. Jeremiah was still growing corn on his new farm in Iowa. Laline was still raising chickens and wondering what the hell those weird folks had been up to. Sheriff Turkleton filed a report about strange folks acting peculiar in the unusual incidents file and forgot about it entirely within a week. The local newspaper ran a small article about unusual tourist behavior on page 6, right between the church potluck announcement and the high school football scores, with the headline, "Visitors behave oddly at local farm. Sheriff reports no laws broken." But in the wider galaxy, Earth's reputation was growing at an exponential rate, fueled by rumors, speculation, and the universal tendency of intelligent beings to assume that if something is classified as dangerous, it must be really dangerous. Trade Route Coordinator Flibbert Spacelane, no relation to Dr. Flibbert Nonsensical, despite the unfortunate similarity in names, was the first to notice the developing problem. Ships were refusing to take contracts that involved passing anywhere near the Sol system. And when he asked why, the responses were all variations of the same increasingly absurd theme. "Are you crazy? That's the planet with the military chickens." "No way. I heard they have psychic cattle that control servant armies. My cousin's brother's friend's ship got chased away by their food-based defense systems." "Forget it. They've got weaponized agriculture. Who weaponizes food?" Flibbert tried to explain that these were clearly misunderstandings, that the reports had obviously been exaggerated, and that a Class 15 species couldn't possibly be as dangerous as everyone seemed to think. But the damage was done, and his protests only made things worse. The more he insisted that Earth couldn't be that dangerous, the more convinced everyone became that it was even more dangerous than they'd originally thought. "Think about it," argued Captain Paranoid McWorryface of the merchant vessel Completely Reasonable Anxiety. "If they're so dangerous that even the galactic government doesn't want to talk about how dangerous they are, and they're sending out experienced diplomats who come back screaming about military chickens, they must be really dangerous, like apocalyptically dangerous." This logic was ironclad, unshakable, and completely wrong, but it spread through the galactic community like wildfire through a paperwork factory. The situation reached peak absurdity when the renowned xenopsychologist Dr. Overthink Everythington published a comprehensive research paper titled "The Terrifying Strategic Genius of Earth's Agricultural Military Complex, a Theoretical Analysis of Impossible Warfare Doctrine." Without ever having visited Earth, or even looked at it through a telescope, Dr. Everythington analyzed the available reports and concluded that humans had achieved the ultimate military breakthrough. They had trained their food to fight for them. "Consider the tactical brilliance," he wrote in the paper that would become required reading at 17 military academies. While other species developed traditional weapons, energy beams, projectile launchers, explosive devices, Earth's inhabitants have created an integrated defense system where their sustenance doubles as their military force. An enemy cannot destroy their weapons without also destroying their food supply, creating an unbreakable strategic loop that makes invasion both militarily impossible and ethically questionable. The paper continued for 247 pages, analyzing every possible aspect of what Dr. Everythington called nutritional warfare theory. He speculated that humans had probably developed methods for turning vegetables into siege weapons, that their livestock had been trained in advanced tactical maneuvers, and that their entire agricultural system was actually a sophisticated planetary defense network designed to appear harmless while being absolutely lethal. The paper won the Galactic Prize for Outstanding Theoretical Xenopsychology, was translated into 47 different languages, and became the foundation for an entirely new field of military studies called agricultural warfare analysis. On Earth, Henrietta the chicken laid an egg, scratched around in the dirt for bugs, and was completely unaware that she was now considered a tactical genius by half the galaxy. But the final straw, the event that would cement Earth's reputation as the most dangerous planet in known space, came when the Galactic Insurance Consortium's Risk Assessment Department updated their actuarial tables. Chief Risk Assessor Cautious McSafety First had been in the insurance business for over 3 centuries, and he'd seen every type of planetary hazard imaginable. He'd calculated premiums for worlds with acid rain, planets where the gravity changed randomly, systems with stars that liked to throw temper tantrums, and moons that were actually sleeping space monsters. None of them had ever presented the kind of unique risk profile that Earth now represented. "Look at this data," he explained to his board of directors, displaying a holographic chart that hurt to look at. "Every other dangerous planet we've encountered has predictable risk factors. Acid rain happens at regular intervals. Gravity fluctuations follow mathematical patterns. Even sleeping space monsters have predictable sleep cycles." He gestured at Earth's risk assessment profile, which looked like someone had fed a computer too much caffeine and asked it to draw a chart. But this planet, their danger level appears to be completely random. One day they're harmlessly feeding birds in parks. The next day they're apparently commanding military chickens. How do you calculate insurance premiums for a species that can apparently weaponize anything? The board of directors, a group of beings so risk-averse that they required safety equipment to think about safety equipment, came to the unanimous conclusion that Earth represented what they called an incalculable risk factor. Within a week, Earth was classified as an extreme risk zone, with premiums so high that shipping companies found it cheaper to add 6 months to their travel time and fly around 3 entire star systems rather than risk passing through the Sol system. This created a fascinating and completely unintended consequence, the Earth exclusion zone, a roughly spherical region of space around the solar system that was now completely devoid of interstellar traffic. The exclusion zone had the immediate effect of making Earth the most isolated planet in the galaxy, which was ironic because humans had been trying to make contact with alien civilizations for decades and were completely unaware that dozens of species were now actively avoiding them. Director Stuffy Bottom, returning from his extended lunch break to find his office filled with panicking bureaucrats, emergency reports, and at least 3 different species of coffee that had achieved consciousness and were demanding workers' rights, realized that the situation had spiraled completely out of control. "Sir!" shouted Chief Analyst Worry McFrettington, waving a stack of reports that was approximately 3 feet tall. "We have a situation. Earth's threat assessment has spiraled completely out of control. The entire galaxy thinks they're some kind of agricultural military superpower. Trade routes are being rerouted. Insurance companies are declaring them uninsurable. Military academies are teaching courses about their theoretical warfare capabilities." "What?" Director Stuffy Bottom bellowed, his voice reaching levels that made the furniture nervous. "But they're Class 15. I have the original report right here." He waved Zephyrus Blandsworth's original classification form like a man trying to convince reality to make sense. It says, "harmless wildlife," right on the form. See? Harmless. "Sir," said Dr. Measurement, who had been hastily recalled from her research sabbatical and was looking considerably more nervous than when she'd left, "I think there may have been some fundamental misunderstandings in our initial observations." "What kind of misunderstandings?" Director Stuffy Bottom demanded, his voice dripping with the kind of barely controlled panic that made his subordinates start updating their resumes. Dr. Measurement shifted uncomfortably, consulting her notes with the expression of someone who was about to deliver very bad news, and knew it. "Well, sir, we may have been talking to the wrong species." The silence in the room was so complete that you could hear a pin drop, assuming pins made noise when dropped in artificial gravity, which they don't, but the metaphor still applies because the silence was really, really complete. "You mean to tell me," Director Stuffy Bottom said slowly, his voice dropping to levels that were somehow more terrifying than his shouting, "that our entire assessment of Earth's dominant species was based on conversations with livestock? In our defense, sir, they were very large and seemed to be in charge of the smaller bipedal creatures." "The smaller bipedal creatures are the actual dominant species." "Yes, sir. We think so. Maybe. It's complicated." Director Stuffy Bottom did what any reasonable bureaucrat would do when faced with the complete collapse of everything he thought he understood about his job. He had a nervous breakdown. This was not a quiet, dignified nervous breakdown. This was a full-scale bureaucratic meltdown that involved 17 minutes of incoherent screaming, 6 cups of calming tea, 3 different types of sedatives, and a brief period where he seriously considered changing his name and opening a small restaurant on a quiet planet where the most dangerous thing was mildly spicy soup. After his breakdown and 3 additional cups of tea, he made the executive decision that would define his legacy in the annals of galactic bureaucracy. "We're going to fix this mess. We're going to send a proper scientific expedition to Earth, with proper scientists who can tell the difference between cows and humans. And we're going to get proper data that doesn't involve talking to farm animals. Sir, ventured junior analyst Bibble Worrywart, whose job was to worry about things before they became disasters. What if the humans really are dangerous? What if all the reports are somehow correct and we've just been incredibly lucky so far? What if they really have weaponized their agriculture? Director Stuffybottom considered this question for exactly 4 seconds, which was his standard processing time for completely terrifying possibilities. Then we'll find out when our research team doesn't come back, won't we? The new expedition was led by Dr. Competent Actual Scientist, the department's most experienced xenobiologist and the only researcher in the entire organization who had ever successfully identified a dominant species on the first try. Her impressive record included correctly identifying the intelligent crystalline entities of Kepler 186f, instead of assuming the rocks were in charge, properly recognizing the gaseous beings of Wolf 359 as the dominant life forms, rather than the small mammals they occasionally possessed for transportation, and successfully establishing communication with the hive mind of Proxima Centauri b without accidentally starting a war or insulting anyone's reproductive choices. Her team included linguists, cultural analysts, military observers, xenopsychologists, emergency medical personnel, and one very nervous insurance adjuster who was there to assess the actual risk levels for future policy updates. They arrived on Earth on a Wednesday that was perfectly ordinary by Earth standards, but would go down in galactic history as the day everything got much more confusing. Their advanced scanning equipment, which had been upgraded significantly since the previous disasters, identified what appeared to be a major population center, so they landed in what their computers confidently declared was an optimal observation site. This turned out to be downtown Poughkeepsie, New York, during rush hour on a day when the local marathon was being held. 3 construction projects were causing traffic detours, and the annual Weird Foods Festival was setting up in the main square. Dr. Actual Scientist stepped out of her ship, took one look at the bustling city, the traffic, the humans hurrying along sidewalks while talking into small devices, the marathon runners jogging past in groups while wearing numbers pinned to their shirts, and the festival vendors setting up booths advertising chocolate-covered scorpions and ghost pepper ice cream, and came to an immediate, terrifying conclusion. Oh, cosmic forces, help us. We are in such deep trouble. The problem wasn't that humans were dangerous in the way the galaxy expected them to be dangerous. The problem was that humans were dangerous in ways that nobody in the history of the galaxy had ever expected any species to be dangerous. Within the first hour of observation, Dr. Actual Scientist's team documented humans engaging in behaviors that defied every known principle of survival, self-preservation, and basic common sense. They watched humans voluntarily enter small metal boxes that moved at speeds that would be fatal if anything went wrong, apparently for the purpose of getting from one place to another when walking was a perfectly viable option. Even more disturbing, they seemed to enjoy this activity, listening to music and talking on communication devices while hurtling through space in metal death traps. They observed humans consuming substances that were literally on fire and seemed to enjoy the experience. The festival booth selling ghost pepper ice cream had a line of humans waiting to voluntarily inflict what appeared to be oral torture upon themselves. They recorded humans engaged in activities that appeared to be ritualized combat, except the participants were laughing and appeared to be doing it for entertainment. A group of humans was playing what their translator identified as ultimate frisbee, which involved running, jumping, and colliding with each other while trying to catch a spinning disc, and they seemed to think this was fun. Most disturbing of all, they watched the marathon runners, Humans who were voluntarily running 2 miles for absolutely no reason other than personal satisfaction, and many of them appeared to be enjoying the experience despite obvious physical distress. "Sir," Dr. Actual Scientist's assistant, Dr. Cautious Observation, whispered urgently while monitoring their scanning equipment, "I've been analyzing their communication frequencies and public information networks. They appear to be voluntarily subjecting themselves to physical stress on a regular basis. They have entire buildings dedicated to this activity. They call it working out." "Working out what?" Dr. Actual Scientist demanded, frantically taking notes. "That's just it, sir. They're not working anything out. They're just making themselves tired and sweaty and sore on purpose, and they pay other humans to help them do it more efficiently." Dr. Actual Scientist watched a group of humans jogging past their hidden observation post. The humans were clearly exhausted, breathing heavily, sweating profusely, showing obvious signs of physical distress, and they were smiling. Several of them were even talking and laughing while engaging in what appeared to be voluntary physical torture. "They're enjoying it," she whispered in horror, her tentacles curling with distress. "They're voluntarily engaging in what appears to be systematic physical torture, and they're happy about it. What kind of species evolves this way?" But things got exponentially worse when they observed a human dental office. "Dear cosmic forces," screamed Dr. Observation, nearly dropping his scanner and alerting the entire team to a level of distress that required immediate attention. "They're voluntarily allowing other members of their species to drill holes in their heads with mechanical devices, and they're using metal instruments to scrape things. And look," added Dr. Medical Analysis, pointing her trembling tentacle at the window of the dental office. "The one having holes drilled in his head is paying the one doing the drilling. And there's a waiting room full of other humans who are waiting for their turn." Dr. Actual Scientist made careful notes in her official research log. "Humans appear to have developed a ritualized torture system where they pay each other to inflict controlled damage to their cranial cavities. This appears to be considered normal healthcare rather than punishment. Possible evidence of advanced masochistic cultural development. Recommend immediate threat level reassessment." But the final straw, the observation that broke their understanding of basic survival instincts entirely, came when they witnessed something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. They watched a human voluntarily jump out of a perfectly functional aircraft. The aircraft was flying. It was high in the sky, it was working perfectly well, and a human jumped out of it. With a parachute, yes, but that didn't make it any less incomprehensible to species that had spent millions of years evolving specifically to avoid falling out of the sky. "That's it," Dr. Actual Scientist announced, packing up her equipment with hands that were shaking slightly. "We're done here. Pack up everything. We're leaving, now." "But sir, we've only been here 6 hours. Our mission parameters called for at least a week of observation." "6 hours is more than enough," Dr. Actual Scientist declared, her voice rising to levels that indicated serious psychological distress. "These creatures voluntarily engage in activities that should kill them. They pay each other to cause controlled pain. They seem to think high-speed metal boxes are recreational vehicles. They jump out of aircraft for fun. They run for miles without being chased by anything. I'm not staying here long enough to find out what else they consider normal behavior." The expedition's report, filed from a safe distance of approximately 12 light-years, contained the phrase that would forever define humanity in galactic consciousness. Earth's dominant species appears to have evolved beyond normal survival instincts. They actively seek out danger, discomfort, and situations that would be lethal to most life forms, apparently for recreational purposes. Traditional threat assessment is impossible because conventional threat assessment assumes species want to avoid danger, not pursue it enthusiastically for entertainment. Additional note: they appear to have created an entire economic system based on paying each other to inflict controlled harm for health maintenance purposes. This suggests either advanced masochistic tendencies or intelligence so far beyond our understanding that their behavior appears insane to less evolved species. Final recommendation: avoid all contact. These beings are completely unpredictable and may be operating on principles of logic that are incompatible with known physics. The report reached galactic headquarters just as Director Stuffy-Bottom was attempting to explain to the board of directors why Earth's threat assessment had changed 17 times in the past 6 months, and why his department was now the laughingstock of the entire galactic bureaucracy. "So let me understand this," said Board Chairwoman Stern Disapproval, reading the latest report through her ceremonial viewing spectacles while her expression grew increasingly concerned. "The humans are dangerous, not because they have superior weapons or advanced military tactics, but because they do dangerous things for entertainment." "That appears to be correct, ma'am," Director Stuffy-Bottom replied, his voice carrying the tone of a man who had given up trying to make sense of anything. "And they pay each other to inflict minor injuries for what they consider health maintenance purposes?" "Yes, ma'am. Apparently it's called dentistry and medicine, and they voluntarily leave perfectly safe aircraft while in flight, trusting their lives to large pieces of fabric." "Yes, ma'am. They call it skydiving and consider it recreational, and they run for miles without being chased by predators or fleeing from danger." "Yes, ma'am. They call it marathons and jogging and seem to think it's enjoyable." Chairwoman Disapproval set down the report and looked directly at Director Stuffy-Bottom with the expression of someone who was beginning to question the fundamental nature of reality. "Director, in your professional opinion, after 47 years of planetary classification experience, what threat classification would you assign to a species that treats mortal danger as a recreational activity and considers pain to be a form of healthcare?" Director Stuffy-Bottom considered this question very carefully. In his 47-year career, he had classified species that could dissolve starships with acid spit, beings that communicated through controlled nuclear explosions, sentient gas clouds that considered entire planets to be afternoon snacks, crystalline entities that could manipulate gravity as easily as most species blinked, and hive minds that treated star systems like board games. None of them had ever seemed as fundamentally unpredictable and potentially dangerous as humans. "Ma'am," he said finally, with the tone of a man who had reached the absolute limits of his professional expertise, "I honestly don't think we have a classification that covers this situation." "Then make one." And that's how Earth became the first and only planet in galactic history to receive the entirely new classification of Class Impossible, unpredictable beyond all reasonable assessment, approach with extreme caution and a very open mind. The official description, which would become legendary among xenobiologists, read, "Dominant species engages in behaviors that range from harmlessly bizarre to inexplicably survival-defying, apparently for personal satisfaction and entertainment. Threat level varies from completely harmless to accidentally terrifying, depending on what they happen to be doing at any given moment. Species appears to have evolved beyond normal survival instincts and may operate on principles of logic that are fundamentally incompatible with known biological and psychological models." The classification came with an extensive footnote that became required reading at every xenobiology program in the galaxy. Note: previous reports of weaponized livestock and military chickens have been determined to be the result of observer error and species misidentification. The chickens are just chickens, the cows are just cows. This somehow makes the entire situation more confusing, not less, because it means the humans achieved their current threat level classification entirely through their own inexplicable behavior, rather than through any advanced technology or superior evolution. Within a month, Earth's new classification had an unexpected and unprecedented effect. It made humans the most fascinating species in the galaxy. Doctor, Prestigious xenosociology of the University of Higher Learning somewhere published a groundbreaking paper titled The Human Paradox: How a Species Survives by Systematically Ignoring Survival. Philosophers across 17 different star systems began debating whether humans had achieved a higher form of consciousness that transcended basic survival instincts, or whether they had simply evolved beyond basic intelligence and were surviving through sheer cosmic luck. The Contemplative Order of Deep Thinkers, a religious organization dedicated to pondering the universe's most profound mysteries, declared humans to be either the wisest beings in existence who have transcended the limitations of fear, or the luckiest fools in the universe who should have gone extinct millennia ago, and spent the next 3 years in intensive meditation trying to determine which interpretation was correct. Most importantly, every major xenopsychology program in the galaxy immediately added human studies to their curriculum, despite the fact that nobody had yet successfully studied humans for more than a few hours without experiencing either an existential crisis or a nervous breakdown. The irony was not lost on Director Stuffybottom. In attempting to classify Earth as a harmless Class 15 planet, his department had accidentally made humans the most talked about, most studied, and most feared species in galactic history. The situation became even more complex when the galaxy's leading experts began publishing competing theories about human behavior. Dr. Cerebral Overthinkerton published The Courage Hypothesis: Humans as the Ultimate Evolutionary Success Story, arguing that humans had evolved beyond fear and thus achieved perfect adaptation to any environment. Dr. Pessimistic Worrybottom countered with The Luck Theory: Statistical Analysis of Impossibly Successful Stupidity, which argued that humans were essentially running the universe's most successful accident. The academic debate became so intense that several universities established entire departments dedicated to human paradox studies, despite the fact that the core data consisted of 6 hours of observation in Poughkeepsie and some confused reports about talking to farm animals. Meanwhile, on Earth, life continued exactly as it always had, blissfully unaware of the cosmic chaos humans had inadvertently created. Jeremiah Buckleberry was enjoying retirement on his new farm in Iowa, teaching his grandson how to fix tractors and completely unaware that he had accidentally triggered the greatest classification crisis in galactic history by offering lemonade to some confused aliens. Laleen Crankshaw's chickens continued laying eggs without any awareness that they had briefly been considered the cornerstone of an advanced military civilization. Henrietta, in particular, had achieved a level of fame throughout the galaxy that would have been utterly baffling to her, had she been capable of understanding fame or the galaxy or anything more complex than bug good, rain bad. Sheriff Turkleton never did figure out what those strange folks had been up to, but filed it under big city nonsense and forgot about it entirely, never knowing that his attempt to politely assist some confused tourists had accidentally caused a galactic panic. Dr. Actual Scientist, now safely back on her home planet of sensible behaviors only, received the Galactic Medal for Outstanding Achievement in Not Getting Killed while doing science, despite encountering the most confusing species in known space. She used her acceptance speech to announce her retirement from xenobiology and her new career in cataloging rocks, which she described as much more predictable and significantly less likely to voluntarily jump out of aircraft for entertainment purposes. The Galactic Department of Planetary Classifications quietly updated their procedures to include a new requirement. All Class 15 designations must be confirmed by at least 3 independent research teams, none of whom are allowed to talk to farm animals, and all observations must be conducted in multiple locations over extended periods to account for the possibility that the first observation site might not be representative of the species as a whole. Zephyrus Blansworth III was promoted to Senior Classification Specialist and given a new rubber stamp that read, "Requires extensive further investigation," instead of "approved." He began using it on every single form that crossed his desk for the next 2 years, just to be absolutely certain that he would never again accidentally classify a species that considered jumping out of aircraft to be recreational. But perhaps the most significant change was in the galaxy's shipping and travel patterns. The Earth exclusion zone, originally created by fear and misunderstanding, remained in place by popular demand. What had started as a panicked avoidance of a supposedly dangerous planet had evolved into something else entirely, a tourist attraction. Tour companies began offering scenic routes around the human system for species who wanted to glimpse the mysterious planet from a safe distance. The tours were incredibly popular, especially among academics and philosophers who wanted to observe the homeworld of the galaxy's most paradoxical species. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted life forms," the tour guides would announce as their ships maintained a careful distance from Earth's solar system. "We are now approaching the home system of the humans, the only known species that has achieved class impossible status not through superior technology or evolution, but by being completely unpredictable. If you look through the viewing ports, you can see their homeworld, where they are presumably engaging in inexplicably dangerous recreational activities at this very moment." The exclusion zone had accidentally become humanity's first and most effective defense system, and it had been built entirely by aliens who were too confused and nervous to visit. Meanwhile, human scientists continued their search for extraterrestrial life, completely unaware that dozens of species were watching them from a distance and debating whether humans were geniuses or lunatics. Earth remained class impossible, the only planet in the galaxy whose official threat level was listed as "it depends on what they're doing today and whether they're doing it for fun." Then, the Galactic Safety Commission eventually established a new warning system specifically for Earth. Caution: inhabitants may be engaging in activities that appear dangerous but are actually recreational. Do not attempt to rescue unless specifically requested. Do not panic if you observe humans jumping from aircraft, running for no apparent reason, or paying each other to inflict controlled harm. This is considered normal behavior. In the end, a small sign appeared on Director Stuffybottom's desk, replacing all his previous motivational posters and bureaucratic slogans. "Earth, we still don't understand them. But at least now we know we don't understand them, and that's probably the most understanding we're going to get." The galaxy had learned to live with the fact that humanity existed, was completely inexplicable, and was probably going to continue being inexplicable for the foreseeable future. Humanity never knew that they had become the most feared, most studied, most avoided, and most fascinating species in the galaxy, simply by being themselves and treating danger like entertainment. Perhaps that was the most perfectly human thing of all.